Hello everyone, this is 𝗗𝗨 and today I'll be discussing with you guys the June paper. Now the June ACT paper was a little bit different as it did not focus too much on the craft and structure part. More of it was about the information and ideas and standard English conventions. Relatively, if I talk about it, the paper was easy, at least the first module. The paper was relatively towards the easier part. Let's try and discuss this paper and see the type of questions. For ease of understanding, I have divided this paper into different components. So we'll be discussing the questions that are related to craft and structure differently. Then we'll be discussing information and ideas separately and so on and so forth. So let's first, go and try and discuss the questions that are related to craft and structure. Now, we know for a fact that craft and structure has questions that are related to words in context. We have questions that are related to main purpose, structure, and then we have questions that are related to cross-text connections. And lastly, we have the function questions where a part of the passage is underlined and we have those questions. So let's see the paper that we had and see how the questions were. So if you look at the first question, it says the following text is from the 𝗗𝗨 2003 novel, The 𝗗𝗏𝐾𝐜. Gokul, a child, is at a beach in Massachusetts with his father. He watches his father raise a kite within minutes into the wind, so high that Gokul must tip his head back in order to see a rippling speck against the sky. The wind whips around their ear, turning their faces cold. As used in the text, now this is important, this is the question, as used in the text, what does the word raise most nearly means? Now, when we talk about the word that we want to take out, the word should fit right into the passage, right? So it has to be as per the context, like the other questions say. It has to be logical and it has to be precise. Both of these things should, agree on that word. So if you look at it, the first option says strengthen. So if you read the word raise, it has to mean that, when something goes up. Now, strengthen does not mean that. Congratulate does not mean that, and even grow does not mean that. Grow, yes, it means to increase, but over here in the context, when you say he watches his father grow a kite, obviously he was not growing a kite, he was putting it up, lifting it up, right? So the best word for this, or the best answer for this question over here, has to be option B, right? So this is how the words in context go on. Now, my take, or the best strategy to go for the words in context question, is that you work out a word before you move on to the options, right? That will give you the best idea of what your option should be, or what your answer should be. You can then move on and test your choices. That is how you can go on with it. Now let's move on to the next question. It says, novelist Leon Forrest admired William Faulkner's writing style. Okay. Forrest's novel Divine Days contains a long passage in tribute to Faulkner that is a perfect blank of Faulkner's style. Anyone familiar with Faulkner's writing would see the resemblance, right? So if you're talking about the resemblance, if you're talking about, something that is matching, right? So the sentence says, and again, the question is asking us which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word. So we have to find out a word that is the most logical and that is the most precise. So let's first, before moving on to the option, let's try to work out the word that we need over here. So it says Forrest's novel Divine Days contains a long passage in tribute to Faulkner. That is a perfect blank of Faulkner's style. So it has to do with something with the style. Anyone familiar with the writing would see the resemblance. So if anyone familiar with his writing would see the resemblance, then the writing that we have has to be, somewhat a copy of it, right? Or it has to be, something that is related to a copy or something similar to that, right? So it can be imitation, yes, it cannot be forgetting, it cannot be rejection, it cannot be opinion, because all of these three choices, when we test it with the option that we need, they are just not fitting, right? So obviously they cannot be the answer over here. So the best answer over here will be imitation, right? So imitation is somewhat a copy, and obviously when you have an imitation of something, anyone who is familiar with that would see the resemblance, right? That is how it works. Now let's move on to the next question. We're still into craft and structure. Normally, this is the pattern of SAT. When you start up with the paper, the first few questions are from words in context. So if you have a good vocabulary and if you know how to pull out a word in a particular context, obviously it will be very easy for you to go on with it, right? So if you read this question, it says, The Ghana Stock Exchange in Accra, Ghana is a dedicated exchange for investing in companies operating in Ghana, ensuring those companies receive a certain regulatory oversight. So if it has an oversight, it makes the confidence go up, right? So it has been regulated. Knowing this, can blank potential investors worry about bureaucratic minutiae and thereby allow them to instead focus on identifying sound business opportunities? So what you're doing is you're giving your potential investors confidence. So obviously, if the investors are confident, what has to go with their worries? Their worries will obviously go down. So you need a word over here that means to decrease, right? You need a word over here that means to lessen, right? So the words that you have over here in the options, convey obviously does not mean to decrease. Amplify means to increase. So that is the opposite of what we need, right? So that cannot be the answer. And designate again does not mean that. So the best answer over here has to be assuage. Now, assuage is basically to lessen something, to alleviate something, to decrease something. All of these meanings are fitting over here. And if you put this word over here in blank, that would be the best answer. That is how you have to go with it. Now, guys, you have to remember, when you're doing this in paper, I am taking some time to explain this. When you are doing in your paper, right, you guys should do this. You should be able to do this in 30 or 40 seconds, right? I do understand that you have around 70-80 seconds for every question on the reading and writing section, but you need to understand that these are questions that you can do in lesser amount of time, and you have to save this time so you can invest that time on the lengthier questions. And again, obviously, I'll be discussing with you the techniques or the time management strategies as well, but for now, let's just stay limited to the discussion of the questions. Now, let's move on to the next question. This question says, the tendency to group authors together into distinct literary movements often encourages literary scholars to blank subtleties in an author's style, right? So what are they doing to the subtleties? What is their reaction to the subtleties? We don't know that. We are going to read it and try to understand what's going on, right? So the next sentence says, those studying the works of Langston Hughes, for instance, may inadvertently overlook nuances of his work by focusing only on the most obvious way in which his style corresponds to the Harlem Renaissance, right? So what they are doing, the word over here is overlook the nuances. Now, nuances is what the meaning of subtleties is. So what are they doing to the subtleties? They are overlooking the subtleties, right? So you need a word that is in line with overlook, and that has to be your answer, right? So that is how you figure out what has to go with the blank. It either has to be the information in the sentence that is before it, or it has to be the information in the sentence that is following it. So either way, you have to, find out what is going on. So over here, you need a word that means to overlook or to, ignore or something like that. Obviously, that is not to denounce. Denounce is to reject something. Magnify is to increase something. That would be again the opposite of it. And scrutinize is to check something. Again, that won't fit over here. What we need over here is to overlook or to, ignore something. So that has to be discount. And when you put it over there in the blank, what are they doing? They are discounting the subtleties. They are overlooking the subtleties. So that is completely all right. That is completely fine, right? So the answer for this question would be option B. Let's move on. Now, we are done with the words in context question. We are on to the next question, and that is the purpose question. Now, these questions can be the trickiest of the lot. Why? Because the purpose questions are not only related to the text. Obviously, they are related to the text or the passage that we have, but they go one step ahead. And what is that one step ahead? They are about the why. And that is the beauty of craft and structure, that the questions that you have in craft and structure will not only ask you about what is written in the passage, they will go one step ahead. They will ask you to analyze. They will push you to analyze and think what those passages are all about, right? So unlike the main idea questions that will only ask you about the content of the passage, over here you have to go on with the content of the passage, and along with the content of the passage you have to think, why is this happening? Why that passage is written? So you have to basically get to the call to action. You have to determine a call to action if you want the answer to the purpose question. So I'll obviously be making separate videos towards the strategies and everything, but let's just discuss this question for now. So this question says, the following text is adapted from Louise Erdrich's 2020 novel The Night Watchman. Louis Pipestone is collecting signatures for a petition from fellow members of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa on tribes reservation in North Dakota. 𝐿𝑜UIS tended the petition like a garden. Now let's start from here. Louis Pipestone tended the petition like a garden. He kept it with him at all times. So he was very serious about it. That is what it means, right? In town, his eyes sharpened when he noticed a tribal member who hadn't yet signed. So, eyes went sharp. So he basically went on alert whenever he saw someone who had not signed, right? So moving on. Wherever they were, at the gas pump, mercantile, general store, or Henry Cafe, or on the road, or outside the clinic and hospital, Louis concerned them. If they were waiting for a baby to be born, he'd have them sign. So this is something extreme, right? So even if there's someone who is waiting for the baby to be born, he's going there to the hospitals and making them sign. That is how serious he was for this, right? So he just wanted people to sign it, and he was very serious about it. That is what he wanted, right? If they were laughing, if they were arguing, if they were talking, if they were taking a child home from school, they signed. So that is what he was going. So the purpose of this passage has to be something that has to be his determination about the petition, right? That is very important. So if you look at the question says, which choice best states the main purpose of the text? So as we have read this before, we are not only going to take the the content of the passage, we are also going to take why this passage has been written. So if you look at option A, it says to demonstrate that most tribal members are enthusiastic about signing the petition. So now, those tribal members, we don't know if they were enthusiastic about signing it or not. Maybe they were, but we don't know that. We cannot get this information from the passage. What we know is that Louis was very enthusiastic. He went to them, he made them sign. There is a possibility that those members were also enthusiastic about it, but we don't know that, right? So if you don't know that, we cannot assume something, right? So this cannot be the answer. If you look at option B, it says to show that attitudes towards the petition within the tribal community change over time. Even if they do, we don't get this information from the passage. Even if we get this information from the passage, this is not the main purpose of the passage, right? So this will be ignored as well. If you look at option C, to portray Louis Pipestone's strong commitment to collecting signatures for the petition. So this is the strong commitment. He was going everywhere. He was going to the hospitals. He was going to, where they were laughing, where they were crying, where they were talking, where they were, everywhere, in the cafes, on the road. So that is what they're saying. He was keeping it within, at all times. So, the best answer for this will be option C. If you look at option D, it says to suggest that some tribal members refuse to sign the petition because they dislike Louis Pipestone. Again, this information is not there in the passage. Even if it were there in the passage, this is not the main purpose of the passage. So in both the scenarios, we are not going to take this as our answer. And the best answer for this question will be option C. So we have to see the call to action. So this is to portray. The passage wanted to portray the enthusiasm or the determination of Louis to do this thing or do this job or to get those signatures, right? So that is what the call to action is, right? It's one step ahead of the main idea. But yes, if you understand the main idea, if you understand what the passage is talking about, you'll obviously get to it, right? Now let's move on. Now this is the question that I talked to you guys about. This is the function question, right? Now in function questions, what you get is you get a passage. Now that passage is underlined at a certain place or certain phrase, and you have to find out the relationship of the part that has been underlined with the remaining passage, right? That is what you have to do. So let's try to read this and see what's going on in this passage. It says, in Ojibwe. Now again, there's one this is one tip that you guys can always use when you get names like these at times which are maybe difficult to pronounce, or maybe it may take a couple of your seconds. You can just replace these names with X or Y or A, B, C or whatever, just to save your time, because obviously these names are important, but they have nothing to do with the answer of the question, right? So again, that is one thing that we can do. So in Ojibwe, an indigenous language from Great Lakes region of what are now the United States and Canada, Pangi means a little bit, whereas Pangi means rarely. This phenomena in which an element of a root is repeated, sometimes with modification within another word that is related to the root word, is called reduplication. In this case, the element pa in Pangi gets repeated in Papangi. There are many examples of this type of reduplication in Ojibwe. Now, if you look at the underlined part, because the question, which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence in the text as a whole? So if you look at it, the function, or first, if you try to understand what the underlined part is talking about, the underlined part is talking about what is the definition, right? So it is clearly describing or telling us what this phenomena is, right? What this phenomenon is, right? again, if you talk about the rest of the passage is also talking about the same thing. So it's like the part that is underlined is describing or is defining what is written in the rest of the passage. That is how we can go about it, right? So if you look at option A, it says it provides a general definition of the phenomena discussed in the text, right? So yes, it is giving you a general definition of the phenomena, because again, whatever is written in the underlined part is the same thing what has been talked about in the passage as well. If you look at option B, it says it explains where the language discussed in the text is formed. We don't know that, and even if it is not the relationship of the underlined part with the passage. And secondly, it is not something that has been talked about in the underlined part. So obviously it wouldn't make sense and it won't be the answer. If you look at option C, it says it contrasts the language discussed in the text with other languages. Again, no, this is one of the nuances that has been talked about in the underlined part, and that nuance has been discussed in the rest of the passage as well. So obviously this won't be the answer as well. If you look at option D, it says it provides English translation of the Ojibwe words discussed in the text. This is completely irrelevant. So the options that are completely irrelevant, obviously you won't be taking them as your answer. And the best answer for this will be option A. So these were the questions that were related to craft and structure in the June paper. We will be back with other videos, and we'll be discussing other sections and other components as well. Stay with us, keep watching, try to understand the nuances, try to understand and get an idea of the questions that we're getting on the SAT, and try to understand how we are supposed to solve them. Until then, thank you so much. This is 𝗏𝐶𝐶.